At the end of the House of the Dragon premiere, King Viserys Targaryen reveals to his daughter, Princess Rhaenyra, a Targaryen family secret, which only a select few are allowed to know. Before we get into the prophecy, I think it's a good idea to set things straight regarding what myself and other Game of Thrones fans mean when we say canon, since the issue of canon is being brought up when we get historical lore details about A Song of Ice and Fire within HBO adaptations. So it's useful to think of A Song of Ice and Fire canon as a Y shape. The stem of the Y is everything in A Song of Ice and Fire history before the births of Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow at the beginning of the main story. Then, the two branches of the Y are the HBO canon, or the Thrones canon, and the book canon, respectively. Both the Thrones canon and the book canon have a shared history, meaning the stem, so events like Nymeria's journey to Dorne and the entire Dance of the Dragon Civil War happened in both the HBO Thrones canon and the book canon written by George R.R. Martin. However, events like Arya killing the Night King and Victarion Greyjoy not existing in Game of Thrones are specifically Thrones canon, since the Night King is not a character in the books, and Victarion Greyjoy very much does exist. I hope that clears things up. Essentially, Aegon's prophecy exists in the book canon, as confirmed by George R.R. Martin, but the exact details of the prophecy we received in the premiere of House of the Dragon is just Thrones canon for now. Aegon the Conqueror is the grandfather of Viserys' grandfather. Aegon conquered Westeros, minus Dorne, in 1 AC, and became the first king of Westeros. Viserys is the fifth king, ruling just over a century after the conquest and about 80 years after Aegon's death. Besides both of them being kings, Viserys also wields Aegon's Valyrian steel sword, Blackfire, which traditionally is held by the king of the Iron Throne. Viserys even bonded with Aegon's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, in the beast's old age, but he died when Viserys was just 17. But more so than sharing a sword and a dragon, Viserys shares his ancestor Aegon's interest in the deeper mysteries, especially dreams. Both Aegon and Viserys share an ancestor called Daenys the Dreamer. She lived in Old Valyria with her father, Rhaegar Targaryen, later known as the Exile. 114 years before Aegon's conquest, Daenys had a dragon dream, a mystical premonition related to the fall of Valyria. Daenys saw Valyria erupt in a great cataclysm. The 14 Flames volcano system spewed molten lava, and ash filled the sky. No man or dragon survived the doom, but Daenys' dream convinced her father Aenar to bring the Targaryen family across the Narrow Sea to Dragonstone, 12 years before the doom occurred. Had Daenys not had her dragon dream, or had Aenar not believed her, Aegon, Viserys, and Rhaenyra would have never been born. Aegon himself, a century after Daenys lived, had his own dragon dream, and he learned from his forebears that it is wise to listen to a Targaryen's premonitions. Valyrians possess magical, mystical abilities that, as far as we know, no other race or culture does in A Song of Ice and Fire, apart from the inconsistent and rare ability to warg or greensea amongst northerners. Besides the ability to tame and bond with dragons, the Valyrians are also resistant to fire, though not completely fireproof. That was a Daenerys thing. And they were said to practice sorcery and dark arts. Some believe their sorcery upset the gods, and they caused their own doom by delving too deep into promiscuous polytheism and dark spells. Even Visenya Targaryen, Aegon's older sister and wife, was rumored to practice sorcery, resulting in the birth of their son Maegor. But when Aegon was still just Lord of Dragonstone, he had a dream like Daenys did, but instead of seeing the end of his own land, he saw a threat which would destroy all the realms of men entirely. Here's the full quote from King Viserys in House of the Dragon's premiere. Our histories. They tell us that Aegon looked across the Blackwater from Dragonstone, saw a rich land ripe for the capture, but ambition alone is not what drove him to conquest. It was a dream, and just as Daenys foresaw the end of Valyria, Aegon foresaw the end of the world of men. It is to begin with a terrible winter gusting out of the distant north. Aegon saw absolute darkness riding on those winds, and whatever dwells within will destroy the world of the living. When this great winter comes, Rhaenyra, all of Westeros must stand against it, and if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne, a king or queen strong enough to unite the realm against the cold and the dark. Aegon called his dream the Song of Ice and Fire. This secret, it's been passed from king to heir since Aegon's time. Now you must promise to carry it and protect it. Promise me this, Rhaenyra. Promise me. So there's a few interesting things to discuss here. First, the prophecy itself, and also how it was transferred for the past century. Also, we should consider how this relates to Jon Snow and the main Game of Thrones / A Song of Ice and Fire storyline. With this prophecy, it's likely Aegon saw more than just a vague northern threat, but probably saw actual White Walkers or others, which are the darkness riding on the winds of a terrible winter in the distant north. The distant north refers to the land of always winter, hundreds of miles beyond the wall, where we learn in Game of Thrones that the Night King made his lair and performed rituals that transformed human babies into others. We are also told that the White Walkers have been sleeping for the past several thousand years since the first long night, so Aegon's dream most likely is set in the future, just like Daenys's. The HBO version of Aegon might have seen the Night King himself, perhaps as he and his White Walkers were creating those weird spiral spindly sights whose meaning is not explained in Game of Thrones. But remember, the Night King doesn't exist in the books. In Fire and Blood, the history book for House Targaryen, Aegon never really seems like the type of guy to conquer 7 kingdoms just because he can. Aegon had a suspicious interest in Westeros years before he began his conquest. For example, the famous painted table, which resides on Dragonstone, was carved into a very accurate shape of Westeros, without geopolitical borders. It's easy enough to believe that Aegon had this prophetic dream, began preparing for a unification of Westeros, but just wasn't too sure about it until he did start his conquest, with the provocation from the Storm King, Argilac Durrandon, as the final straw. Additionally, as far as conquests go, Aegon did his quite mercifully, allowing most regions to retain their status quo, as long as they acknowledge his rule as king. This just supports the idea that Aegon's primary motivation wasn't a lust for power, but rather to prepare Westeros for his prophecy. So naturally, fans will wonder how this prophecy passed from Aegon to Viserys, considering the political turmoil of the past century, and how no one outside of the immediate Targaryen family knows of it. Aegon had 2 sons, Aenys and Maegor. Aenys was the eldest and became the second king of Westeros after Aegon died, so it's obvious that Aegon told him about the prophecy. But Aenys' brother Maegor seized the Iron Throne from Aenys' heir right after Aenys died, and ruled for several years. So would either Aegon or Aenys have told Maegor about the prophecy? Maybe, but it doesn't really matter, since Maegor's line doesn't inherit after him. It is interesting to consider, though, that when Maegor spent half a year sentencing his foes in the Starry Sept of Oldtown, he sent over 3/4 of them to the Wall. That must have been hundreds of men, all sent to take the Black. Perhaps Maegor did know about Aegon's prophecy, and wanted to bolster the Wall's strength in preparation. Otherwise, Maegor doesn't really seem like the type of guy to waste killable men by sending them to the Night's Watch. When Maegor dies, Aenys' youngest son, Jaehaerys, takes the throne. Maegor murdered the eldest son of Aenys, also called Aegon. Aegon was intended to be Aenys' heir, so he probably knew about the prophecy. But when Aegon was murdered by Maegor, his younger brother Jaehaerys was only 5 years old. So perhaps Jaehaerys learned about the prophecy from his mother, Alyssa Velaryon, who Aenys may have told about the dream. This would mean that the idea that this prophecy must be kept a secret between the king and his heir was developed by Jaehaerys himself, who would have passed the secret to Viserys after the Great Council. But ultimately, the exact details regarding who told who about the prophecy isn't that important, since there was a written record of the dream. According to showrunner Ryan Condal, in the Inside the Episode for the premiere, Aegon imbued Valyrian glyphs onto the Valyrian steel dagger, which Viserys always carries with him. Translated, we can see the Valyrian glyphs for air, blood, fire, and blood again. And when put together, we get, "From my blood come the prince that was promised, and his will be the Song of Ice and Fire." This is the same dagger Arya uses to kill the Night King, so it's kind of poetic that the knife containing the prophecy is the one that killed the subject of that prophecy. Obviously, that's a show-only detail, and the books are unlikely to end up in the same way. I won't spoil what happens at the end of House of the Dragon, but all you need to know is that the Targaryen monarchy gets very disjointed and shaky years after the show ends, with several young kings who were perhaps not told about the prophecy by their predecessor, or who didn't know to look at the Valyrian steel dagger. Also, the detail about the prophecy being a secret passed from king to heir is not from George R.R. Martin. That's a show-only detail. Martin did confirm the existence of Aegon having a prophetic dream, though. It's just the acute details that have been made to fit House of the Dragon's characters. such as giving Rhaenyra a purpose to unite the realm that will stick with her from season to season. I'm of the opinion that this Targaryen prophecy was actually lost sometime after House of the Dragon, but was rediscovered only a century later by Rhaegar Targaryen, Daenerys' older brother and the son of the Mad King. In Game of Thrones, we don't get a ton of information on Rhaegar, besides the fact that he liked to sing, he would have been a good ruler, he fell in love with Lyanna Stark, and became Jon Snow's father. The A Song of Ice and Fire books give us insight into Rhaegar's motivations, which are heightened by George Martin's confirmation of Aegon's prophecy. For example, in Book 2, when Daenerys goes to the House of the Undying in Qarth, one of her visions is of her brother Rhaegar, who is holding his son Aegon with his wife Elia Martell. His wife asks, "Will you make a song for him?" And Rhaegar responds, "He has a song. He is the prince that was promised, and his is the Song of Ice and Fire." We don't know if George Martin came up with the idea to name the prophecy in House of the Dragon the Song of Ice and Fire, or if that's a show creation. But we do know that Rhaegar became prophecy-obsessed over the course of his life. He originally believed himself to be the prince that was promised, before realizing instead that the prophesized hero would rather be born later on of his line. Jon Snow is also born of his line, in the show at least, but likely in the books as well. Jon is part ice on his mother Lyanna Stark's side, and part fire on his father Rhaegar Targaryen's side. Aegon's prophecy said a Targaryen king or queen must unite Westeros to defeat the others. Well, in Game of Thrones Season 8, Jon Snow wasn't on the Iron Throne, but he did unify a lot of people. In the books, it's hard to predict how it will go down, since Jon is still dead and yet to be resurrected. So, Rhaegar must have found out about the prophecy in those scrolls he read as a child. Over the years, he may have even had his own dragon dreams, like Daenys, Aegon, and Viserys. If this is true, it seems like there's a pattern of a little over 100 years between each of these mystical, knowledge-bearing Targaryens, since Rhaegar is born about 130 years after Viserys' death. Rhaegar believed in the three-headed dragon prophecy, which possibly expands on both the Prince That Was Promised prophecy and the Song of Ice and Fire prophecy from Aegon. Rhaegar may have believed that 3 Targaryens would fulfill the Azor High role in the Long Night, and together unite the realm against the others. Rhaegar probably thought the 3 heads of the dragon would be his daughter Rhaenys, his son Aegon, and his third child with Lyanna, who would have been of Visenya had Jon been born female, to match the trio of conquerors. In reality, Rhaegar's sister Daenerys and Jon Snow would probably make up 2 of the 3 heads of the dragon. Perhaps Jon's name is actually Viserys in the books, not Aegon, which sounds like Visenya, which I think could really fit nicely. The third head is up in the air. It could be Rhaegar's son Aegon or young Griff. Some fans even think it's Tyrion Lannister. David Lightbringer thinks it's Euron Greyjoy as a Night's King stand-in, which is an idea I really like. So let's summarize all this. George R.R. Martin has confirmed the existence of a prophecy held by Aegon the Conqueror, which prompted him to unite Westeros under Targaryen rule. House of the Dragon adds to this prophecy by making it a secret passed from king to heir. This prophecy gets lost after the Dance of the Dragon Civil War, but rediscovered by Rhaegar Targaryen, either by reading old scrolls or by having his own dragon dreams. So in the main A Song of Ice and Fire storyline, Jon Snow forms a nice candidate to be the Targaryen unifier in Aegon's prophecy. Of course, there are so many other factors in the books, such as what Daenerys' arc will be, and if young Griff truly is who he thinks he is, the not-murdered son Aegon of Rhaegar, who Rhaegar called the prince that was promised in Dany's vision. We'll have to wait and see how all that plays out when George releases Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring any day now. For the final part of this video, I'm going to talk about a spoilery part of Fire and Blood and House of the Dragon related to House Stark, so click away now if you don't want to hear that. It's no secret that Game of Thrones portrayed the Starks as the good guys of the story, so naturally, Thrones fans will want to see a heavy Stark involvement in House of the Dragon as well, which, for a story focused on a Targaryen family war, isn't super easy. In Fire and Blood, the Starks are involved in the war, as Cregan Stark honors his family's pledge to Rhaenyra, and sends men south to the Riverlands, and then later arrives in King's Landing himself to pass judgment on Green supporters at court after the dust settles. However, there is a way the show can involve the Starks even more, and it involves a prophecy. During Season 2 of House of the Dragon, Rhaenyra will send her eldest son Jacaerys to Winterfell on his dragon Vermax to gain House Stark support for his mother. In Winterfell, Jace and Cregan Stark become close friends, and Jacaerys is rumored to fall in love with and marry Sarah Snow, Cregan's bastard sister. Together, Viserys and Cregan sign the Pact of Ice and Fire, which is essentially a marriage alliance. House Stark agrees to join Rhaenyra's cause, and Viserys, who is Rhaenyra's heir and would potentially sit the Iron Throne one day, would marry his firstborn daughter to Cregan's son and heir, Rhaegar Stark. This pact ensures a long-lasting alliance between the Dragon Lords and the Wolves of the North. This pact is called the Pact of Ice and Fire, just like in House of the Dragon, Aegon's prophecy is called the Song of Ice and Fire. One part is fire, and one part is ice. It's no secret in the North that darkness has lurked far beyond the Wall in years past. It's ingrained into the ideology of House Stark, and I bet that a significant part of the "a Stark must always be in Winterfell" saying is related to a potential new Long Night, in which a Stark must help lead the living. Just like in Aegon's prophecy, a Targaryen must sit the Iron Throne to help lead the living. This is based on no evidence really, but I just wouldn't be surprised if Aegon shared his prophecy with Torrhen Stark. His surrender to Aegon during the conquest was a bit cloudy. We know that he amassed a huge army and brought it south of the Neck, but was met by Aegon's army and 3 dragons. Torrhen didn't attack, but instead sent his bastard brother back and forth throughout the night to negotiate with the Targaryens. And when morning came, Torrhen Stark himself crossed the water and knelt to Aegon. We don't know what was said that made Torrhen Stark kneel. Perhaps they were simply hesitant to be burned to the ground, like King Lannister and King Gardner's army was at the Field of Fire. Or maybe Aegon shared this prophecy with Torrhen, and convinced him that their best chance at defeating the Dark Winter once it should come would be with a Targaryen on the Iron Throne, with a Stark serving as Warden of the North. As the prophecy says, a Targaryen must sit the Iron Throne, just like there must always be a Stark in Winterfell. Perhaps they chose to start working together, as Aegon, years later, visited Winterfell on a royal progress many times, as did Jaehaerys and Alysanne. And in House of the Dragon, Viserys will go to Winterfell and renew this friendship between Dragon and Wolf with Cregan Stark. Again, there's no proof of this, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's true. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on this prophecy, and if you think it does a good job of connecting House of the Dragon to Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. Thanks for watching.
And if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne.
Itu